Good evening, everyone. It is a beautiful, beautiful Thursday. Right, yeah, Thursday. I've got to always check which day I am in, July 9th. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Rethink Culture, where culture sciences explore from a three-pronged perspective: the home, society, work, or school, because these are the three spaces that we belong in and more. So today is a special day because I have definitely the opportunity in getting together with four brilliant humans today and speaking about a topic that is so near and dear to everyone, not just in the United States, but from a very global lens. So again, welcome to part 5 of Dismantling Discrimination and Enabling Diversity Through 4 Ships. This series is made possible by Chief of Hearts, a culture science company. I am your host, Mila Duchon, founder and CEO of Chief of Hearts. So the past 4 weeks, I sat with POC communities from around the globe to engage in conversations to hear their struggles and how they have navigated through the viscous landscape throughout their whole lives, and the solutions they have found along the way. I also had the opportunity to get real with POC communities in how discrimination must, and even within amongst their own ethnic groups. Additionally, I had the white community to explore how they can become sponsors in this space. Last week, a group of change makers came together to explore solutions in moving the needle to enabling diversity from a holistic perspective. No solution is ever possible without action items or action with intention for that matter. To dismantle discrimination, racism, and to enable change or diversity, we must have real honest conversations about struggles of the dismissed and the displaced. Change does not happen overnight, nor does it come in a schematic of one formula solves all. Change comes in progressions, and it is important to approach these progressions from an angle or agile approach, and an approach that embraces a widened lens. Today, we will be diving deep into action items that humanizes and brings equity. To explore further, I'm going to bring on these fabulous epic humans. First, I have Surbhi Lowell. Welcome, Surbhi.
Thank you.
And you are welcome. So Surbhi is Chief Impact Officer with Luminary. Second, I have Joey Price, who is the CEO of Jumpstart HR. Welcome, Joey. You're welcome.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Next up, I have Laron Barton, who is a writer and a speaker. Welcome, Laron.
Hey, what's going on, Mila? Thank you for having me. Super juiced.
Oh, I love the word that you use, juiced. Great. And next up, I have Arthur Chun, who is a diversity and inclusion strategist. Welcome, Arthur.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Great having all of you here. So to take a moment, I want to learn about each of you more. So, let's talk a little bit about, who you are. Well, I had the very short introduction, who you are, what got you into the advocacy of the work that you do that integrates diversity as a whole and does not look at it as an isolated team. So let's start with Surbhi.
Sure. So I, at my core, consider myself an educator, and I would say that is somebody who is an adjunct professor. Sure, the educator makes sense, but really in everything that I do, I bring that lens to my work. So that means always learning myself. It means teaching, and I think one of the things it means for me is making sure that everyone around me, that my goal is to help everyone around me win. So what I mean by that is I want everyone to succeed around me. So my role is to make sure that I am doing what I can to help others succeed. And that is really tied into this conversation around what actions can we take and how is diversity, inclusion, equity all part of that? Because for me, it can't be separated.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Joey.
Well, in my profession, human resources, there's often the conversation of HR professionals having a seat at the table. And what I found through entrepreneurship and even through having such a lens into various workplaces is that we often don't allow African Americans and persons of color to have seats at various tables. And so the advocacy work that I do is to make sure that whatever doors I walk into, I leave the door open for others to come behind me. And similar to Sarabi as well, I want to be a teacher and educator and inspire people to say, if I can do it, you can do it too. I grew up in a predominantly Black county in Prince George's County, Maryland, and I've seen what Black excellence looks like, and I want the world to see that as well.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Laron.
Ma'am. At my base, I'm a writer. I write about race, mass incarceration, politics, tech, business, and dating. I guess, lack of a better term, I'm a ethical troublemaker. And so what I like to do is I like to really broach the difficult subjects. I like to shake things up. And because of that, I feel like that in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I don't really like that term. I think it's rather stodgy. I just want to empower people and put them in positions to where they feel like that they can have an impact versus, to quote my friend Neha, be last year's window dressing. So
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Arthur.
Hi. So actually, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, but my background is actually in clinical psychology. So I moved here to the United States in 2016, but actually I was born and raised in Hong Kong. Back in the day, I was involved in most of the time, I kind of work with people with mental illnesses and psychological distress. And a lot of the time, I noticed that a lot of them is kind of related to the social inequity, that people are facing day in and day out. And that creates a lot of psychological suffering. So since I moved here to San Francisco, it becomes more apparent to me, the racial inequities issue here in the United States. And that's kind of paved the path for me to become more involved in the diversity work.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and thank you everyone for being here. Your voice matters. All your efforts that you have been doing and you are doing matters. So I'm really humbled and honored to even share the space with all of you here. So thank you. And I'm really excited to dive deep into these questions and just seeing the impacts that you've already done in the community. I'm really excited. So dismantling discrimination does not follow one particular schematic, right? And we must approach it from a holistic view, like some of the work that each of you have done in your communities. And I like what Laron, you said, you like to disrupt everything, the troublemaker. And I love that. Last week, I spoke about solutions with another group of people, and solutions can only come in different shades, right? Diverse shades. We can explore solutions as much as we want, but without taking actions, that's the key, taking actions. We will always be back to the drawing board. We can talk about solutions, but without that one key action, we will always be back to the drawing board. So what kind of action items can we take to move the needle of enabling change in the current climate? Because I feel like it's like a loop. When you go onto iTunes, you put a song on loop. We have been talking about equity, we've been talking about diversity, especially in this country, for 40 years or more, right? And from a global scale, like in different countries that I've lived, it's in a loop. So what kind of actions can we truly take to move that needle to enabling change? And I'd like to hear each of your perspective through the 4 ships: allyship, partnership, sponsorship, and hardship, and even through each of your efforts. So let's hear from you.
Well, Mila, I'll go first. And earlier on Twitter today, I made a tweet about how there's a difference between allies and all eyes. And allies are people who are actually committed to progress and change. And then all eyes are people who may talk a mean game on social media or may talk amongst their friends and peer groups, but don't really do anything. So I wanted to just reiterate the fact that you can't be an ally without action. And if I were to prioritize the various ships that we're all going to talk about today, my personal perspective is that the heart ship is the most important of them all, because if there is not conviction in your heart to do something, you're not going to go wholehearted, for lack of a better word, and also you're only going to do things just to check the box. And I can tell you that things feel different when someone does something for me just to check the box, or just because they were interested, they're an advocate, they truly understand, they empathize. And so I know we're going to talk about all of the ships today, but I think heartship is the most important. If you can transform your heart, you can transform the world.
I totally agree with Joey. I think that that allyship. So allyship is a verb, right? And so I was just, I was talking with someone today. I was on a podcast, and he's like, "Well, what can white people do to affect change?" And I said, "Look, wearing a Black Lives Matter T-shirt, that's cool. Going to marches is cool. Going to demonstrations is cool, but it's the inner work that needs to start first, right?" So what I mean by the inner work is challenging those racist beliefs, those biases that have been passed down from generation to generation. Because once you start doing the inner work, we're not going to need all of the mass demonstrations. Something else like the Joey said is that when people do things from a demonstrative mode, you can kind of feel it, right? Because it comes off kind of phony baloney. But if people are doing it, as they say where I'm from, if they're doing it off the strength, and if they're just doing it because it's the right thing to do, it shines through. So I think that allyship is a verb. We all have different ways of attacking this, but do something, and if you're going to do something from the heart.
I think the heart part is interesting because it's the piece that people don't see, right? And so in some ways it feels like the hardest because nobody's patting you on the back for it. You are doing it out of a conviction of your ethics. You're doing it out of a conviction of your integrity. And especially, I think, in the social media world, there's this sense that, oh, I need to post this. I need to post this. But at the end of the day, people are going to ask, are they just talking the talk, or is this person also walking the walk? Are they also the folks who are going to speak up in a meeting? So are they going to put themselves at risk? So this whole point of allyship, I say this often, I'm often the only person who looks like me at a table. And I will bring up things that people don't think I will bring up. And in some ways that's my superpower, but it is also risky, right? It's risky to do that. But if I didn't do the hard work, and if I didn't do the things that people don't see, then I can't do that. Because for me, the hard work is also about integrity.
I just have to say I agree with what everyone has said earlier. To me, I feel like hardship is very important because it's like everyone already kind of talk about how people can tell whether you're doing it for the sake of doing it, kind of like a PR practice, or you're actually doing it kind of from the heart, where you actually want to make an impact, right? Just like on LinkedIn, every so often we see people posting about Black Lives Matter, but then you're like, wait a second, I've never seen you post anything And we've been connected for like 2 years. Where did that come from, right? So I kind of question, okay, like whether this is genuine or whether that's kind of like, something you want to do just to make yourself look good. In terms of how we can like kind of, walk the talk, I feel like it's very important for all of us to kind of be able to feel, kind of be comfortable about feeling uncomfortable. And I think like a lot of people, they don't really know how to, go forward and stuff like that. It's because they just don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want to do the hard work. Just like as simple as things like admitting that we all have biases. And people just say to you, no, I don't have biases. I'm a good person, yada, yada, yada. But then you're like, no, we all have biases. That's why we are humans, right? So I feel like a lot of the time before we move forward about like talking about taking actions, is a lot of the time we have to first admit that we screw up in the first place and how we screw up in the first place. And I feel like that part is important.
Thank you for sharing.
So I think I would say that other thing about hard work, and this is hard work also sounds like hard work because it is the other piece is empathy. And I think in general, feelings are things that people don't want to talk about, particularly in professional settings. But for me, the hardship really comes from a place of empathy. And that means not only knowing my feelings, but thinking about how somebody else might feel. So there is this individual feelings piece that rolls up into institutional systemic racism, sexism, all of the isms that we could talk about. But it is also about how does that person feel for me? It's very much about that. And in order to do that, I need to be able to identify my feelings and also put my feelings on hold to be able to identify somebody else's feelings. And that also takes work.
I'm sorry. What do you mean by putting your own feelings aside to understand how another person feels? I'm not clear with that.
Yeah. So if you and I are in an argument, for example, and all I can think about is my anger, I can't hear you.
Right.
Right. Or
okay.
I can't understand why you might be feeling the way you're feeling. So it doesn't mean that you're turning them off, but it does mean a little bit of a pause and like that listening to understand what you're saying and where you're coming from.
Okay, but if someone if I said something to you that was foul, that was very offensive, and if you're mad at me, you have every right. See, you have every right to be mad at me, right? It's like, I said something that was, say, bigoted, and you have every right to lash out because, see, I think what people have to understand that it is your impact trumps intent, right? So I can have the best intentions possible. I can say, hey, listen, this is how I feel, boom, boom, boom. And if you just say no and just, give it to me, I have no choice but just to accept the way that you're feeling. I don't know, if that made a lot of sense, but it's I guess what I'm saying is we're all entitled to our feelings and to respond to whenever we're slighted. I guess that's what I'm saying.
No, I agree. I just don't think that you can listen and really deeply listen if you're listening to your own feelings when the other person is talking. So somehow you need to do both and regulate one and the other at the same time. So you were talking about intent and impact, right? So if all I did when I did we had this conversation and I didn't take the time to listen to what your intent was and also tell you my impact, we're not going to get to any point because you're going to keep saying that was not my intent, and I'm going to keep saying that was your impact.
Well, all right. So if we're both driving, right, and I'm meaning to make a left turn and to not hit you, but I still hit you, my intention doesn't really mean anything. It's I know that you meant to do a clean turn, but you also wrecked my car. So you know.
Yeah, and both people have to talk and both people have to listen.
And that brings to a really important point, right? Humanizing conflicts. And this is something that is not profoundly adopted or adapted, right? And it's humanizing conflicts is a very new theme to everyone. Look at countries that are at war, right? There's so many peace efforts to humanize conflicts, to humanize zones, but there's always a failure. When I say failure, it means like there's something that falls apart. And to your point, Shruti, you mentioned about empathy, right? And Arthur, you mentioned about our biases, right? And it's absolutely human to have our biases, right? When we have a heart, it's going to be biases all the way. But the thing is that, empathy is not something that we can learn within a day. Empathy is something that we have to put in the work to learn about it every single day as we grow. And that is such an important work. In order to move forward, we have to dig deeper within ourselves, right? 10 steps forward, we have to dig ourselves 10 steps deeper. So I want to talk about humanizing conflicts for a minute, because it's such an important and large part of action items. When we want to take action items, we have to listen, we have to learn, we have to understand, right, from all points of view. How are people hurting? How is this displacing someone? How is this misplacing someone? How is this dismissing someone? And action items is also about humanizing conflicts. I want to hear your thoughts, your efforts, your work in how you have humanized conflicts, or the work that you're doing in your spaces, or your thoughts about the importance of humanizing conflicts. Anyone?
Okay, I'll go. I'll go first. So for me, humanizing conflict in my context means having the courage even to have the crucial conversations, whether it be with my team or with my customers, and being able to talk to them and sit on the other side of the table and say, hey, something is not working and we need to address it. Sometimes that could be an issue where I am personally invested. Sometimes it could be, for example, a hire where we're evaluating two candidates, and maybe I feel that one candidate could be as strong as the other, but the perception is that they're not. And so humanizing conflict for me really is about realizing that the other person on the other side of the table, understanding what their values are, what's in it for them, what their motivators are, and figuring out how can I present my argument or my perspective in a way that understands maybe even how they may counteract, or even how they may be thinking and may respond to my comment. So there is a laundry list of ways that we can have conflict with one another, whether it be large or small. But the human aspect is having an understanding of the perspective that's on the other side of the table.
I agree with what Joey has just mentioned. I feel like it's kind of like a human tendency to be right? We always want to be right. We always want to win the battle. So I feel like a lot of time when, conflict arises, the first thing what I usually do is just kind of have to remind myself, just don't call people out. Because we do have the tendency to call people out immediately, right? Or put a person into one specific category, because that's just how our mind tricks us to do. But oftentimes I just kind of remind myself, okay, just learn about, even though the person, on the other end says something really offensive, I usually try to calm myself and just remind myself, okay, why don't I just take a minute just to listen to him, what he has to say or what she has to say, just trying to figure out where those ideas or where those misconceptions come from. Because it's like a lot of the time, if we just, blatantly say to the person, hey, this is wrong. Hey, you shouldn't, talk like that. You shouldn't, behave that way. people immediately get defensive. And I feel like a lot of the time you can't really, have that conversation that you intended to have. So, so for me, humanizing conflict is kind of just like, just try to have the two people in the conversation, they kind of have a level ground. They're on like kind of like an equal basis for the dialogue to continue. Of course, when you have to deal with a racist, that could be very challenging, right? Because it's like whatever you say, they can, flip it around and kind of justify, rationalize it, and and kind of blame you for calling them out or something. So I feel like what is really important is just trying to keep our mind open, just to listen to what the other end have to say. I think that would be a good start.
For me, a couple things. So I think that 95% of all conflicts can be resolved with a conversation. Like, it's rare that anything should be taken to a physical level. I think a lot of conflicts are just sort of misunderstanding, people not understanding where you're coming from. I think Surbi, is that she said something very important. You have to listen. You have to have a conversation and listen, not have a conversation to respond. A lot of people, when you're talking to somebody, they already have their response loaded up. They're like, all right, yeah, blah blah blah. Anyway, so it's like, it's not even like really like listening to what you have to say, because when you listen to comprehend, you can usually sort of come to a middle ground. Now, Arthur, I disagree with you when it comes to calling people out. I think that when it comes to racists, any type of bigot, I think they need to be called out swiftly. The reason why, and one of the so this is my opinion. I could be wrong, but when you don't call people out swiftly and in public, what that says is that you're okay with what that person is doing, and what they're doing, and what that person is doing is okay. Because a lot of times, man, people are so afraid to call out, to have conflict, because they're afraid of reprisal. They're afraid of some type of, retaliation. And so I think that type of behavior has no place in corporate, and just not only corporate America, right? But just society, period. Like, we need to make it cool for people to not be bigots. And so I guess I'm leading to shame, but yeah, man. I mean, like, I'm sorry. If someone says something foul to Joey, I want you to jump in and say, smack it down quick. I mean, because it's like, it has to be swift. We can't tiptoe around this stuff, because when we do, we give it leeway. And when we give it leeway, it can just grow again.
Laurent, I agree with you, like, about like calling it for what it is. But I think it really depends on the goal, like what we're trying to achieve here. I have no problem calling people racist.
Right.
Right. Especially, if the person, I might not necessarily have like a personal relationship with, or if I just, come across situation, like you said, like, oh, if someone says something really offensive to you, for example, I have no problem jumping in and say, hey, like, cut it out. Like, that's wrong. You're being racist here. You're being bigot here. I think that's totally what we have to do, especially, in a situation where I don't necessarily have the personal relationship with that particular person. But in a corporation or in an organization, you can immediately get rid of that person. And it's very rarely that person would be immediately, fired.
True.
So it's likely that you kind of still have to work with that person, and that person will still be in the organization for a period of time, right? So if I really want to try to kind of, work with that person and have the person realize what they said was wrong, or how they behave was unacceptable, I can't really blatantly, say, oh, hey, like, kind of like name calling, hey, you're racist. because that person would just get defensive, and then they would just argue with you. Hey, I'm not a racist. You know, I have a black friend. You know, I have this Asian friend that I grew up with, and then they would put all this like excuses, and it's like the conversations,
everything.
Exactly, right? And then the conversation is going nowhere. So in those situations, I might kind of be a little bit careful, because I do want the person to listen and reflect on their own behavior. So I might be a little bit more gentle. But like I said, it really depends on the situation.
I don't know, like, Joey, look, so, I'm a black man in America, corporate America. Like, obviously, like we sort of, you and I, author, we come across different types of racism. I mean, Joey, do you think as another black male here, do you think that you should pull someone to the side and educate them, or is that your job? I'm just, because for me, I feel like it's not really my job to teach you how to be a better white person. To me, I don't know.
Yeah, Laurent, and I'll be brief about this too, because something I was thinking about is the other ship that we were talking about, or that we want to talk about, and that's partnership. And I think collectively, within an organization, within the human race, we all need to be partners in equality. And so that's going to require various escalated levels of conversation. I think it depends on the relationship that you have with the person that you can pursue that. But we all have to be partners to say, hey, you can't say something racially offensive towards anyone here on the panel and expect for that to be okay. Because now, we're all committing and agreeing that we are all partners in racial equality. And so depending on the relationship, I'll call them out, if that's Twitter, if that's in person, if that's behind closed doors, whatever it may be. But we all have the responsibility to definitely say something. I may have been a bit more passive before the awakening of George Floyd, but now, you're going to hear about it, because I have a responsibility to play my part as a partner in equality.
And Laurent, I was going to say that it's actually, if all of us were a team, right, it's my responsibility, maybe even more so than Joey's responsibility. Because Joey may be impacted in ways that I don't know, and I may not be impacted, or I may be. So it's my job, if I'm doing allyship as an active verb, to show up and say, and maybe not in the moment, it depends on the situation, but to say, like, listen, the comment you made, that comment was racist, and here's why. And in fact, it may be that if I do it, right, versus you do it, it's going to be heard differently. And there may be another situation where that's different. Maybe somebody says something misogynistic, and they're not going to hear it from me in the same way, but they might hear it from you. So in that sense, I think it's all of our jobs to do that. And it's all of our jobs to be thinking about that. And I do think that, I don't know how many of you have also facilitated conversations across race and identity. As a facilitator, it often puts me in a really interesting position, because as a facilitator, the job is to hold the room. And so I'll often do things like, would you repeat what you said? Does anybody in the room have a reaction to that? Well, here are some reactions that I imagine might be coming up. And so in that sense, I think it still is a conversation. It's still putting the person on some sort of, oh, maybe they didn't mean to say that way. Maybe that wasn't their intent, right? But now they have an understanding of what their impact is. So I think in many ways, it is all of our responsibilities to talk about race. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to talk about many of the markers of identity, but race in the US is the one that feels hardest to talk about, and you cannot talk about it without understanding our history, right? And so I think that is something that is really true. And then I also think about the fact that we have immigrants who are coming with their own markers of power and privilege, and now they're put in a place where they've never talked about anti-Black racism, for example, and are now put in that situation. And Arthur, I see you nodding your head, because it wasn't that long ago that you were probably in this situation. So I think it's complicated, but I have found in my experience that race is harder for people to talk about than other markers of identity.
Thank you for sharing, and I absolutely agree with all of your insights on we each have got to be a partner, right? When I was in different parts of the world, in Southeast Asia, right? When I was living in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, like the racism over there is so different, right? It's in Southeast Asian countries like Singapore and Malaysia, even though it's a melting pot, it's reversed to a point where the majority of the race over there are Chinese. Then you have layers and then intersectionality that comes into place. But when foreigners, like over there, foreigners are considered as anyone from Europe or from America. When they come over, automatically they go up the barometer. They get the first step in preference. So let it be white Americans, white Europeans, Black Americans, or Black Europeans. So that is how the caliber goes. And being exposed to that, and then being in Europe, and then coming to the United States and to experience what racism in the United States is, to Ruby's point, it was an eye-opener for me, because it was, to your point, like there's so many immigrants coming over here from a stance of privilege, right? Like immigrants from China, from India, from Britain, from Ireland, from Singapore, from Japan. When they come over here, they have some sort of privilege, like to be education or whatever it is. When they come over here, it's an eye-opener for them. And the narratives that you hear that is being imposed onto them. I used to work for higher education in Wisconsin. And even within a school system in the United States, and it was absolutely shocking. I was absolutely gobsmacked by this. It was, even within a university system, they were segregated. The Black students were segregated. The white students were segregated. They had their own communities. And I had the opportunity to speak with the Black students, and the narratives I kept on hearing was, "You're one of us. You're one of us." And I quickly had to rethink, what do you mean by one of us? Aren't we all one of us? And it took me some time to understand the kind of struggles that they were undergoing, right? And to Joey's point, to everyone's point over here, we have to become a partner and to call out racism. It took me some time to speak up, because I was often called, when I first came to the United States, you're an immigrant. Just based on how I look like, you don't speak English. When I start speaking, they're like, "Oh, where did you learn how to speak English?" Right? It's like, so when I start speaking up, and when I started calling people out is like, not shut up, sit down. No, it's like, why are you calling this person in such a way? Do you know that's not right? And when they explain themselves, "Oh, I saw this in the movies, or I saw this in the telly, in Simpsons cartoon," media plays a huge role. Literature plays a huge role in how history and narratives are written, right? So I'm with all of you about being a partner and calling out, racism or any kind of discriminatory narratives. Even when someone says, "Oh, you're new to the country, you can't speak English." What the bloody hell is someone speaking in? Gibberish? Like, we need to have the courage to say, no, it's a different dialect of English. So I want to open the floor. If you have got any comments, then I want to transition into the next question. I want to make sure that I'm getting all of your thoughts. Okay. All right. So I want to approach this next question, so hearing all of you from the kind of approaches that you are coming from, how can we get systemic communities, right, to come on board to executing on action items that bring equity and continuous innovation? So let it be in schools. So Ruby, I know that you've taught in schools, in hospitals, housing, workplace. Lorona and Joey are very heavily in the workplace, healthcare. So I want to hear your thoughts. How can we get systemic communities to come on board to executing on action items that bring equity and continuous innovation?
So I'll talk a little bit about what I know, and certainly I'm not an expert on schools, certainly not K-12, but we do know that schools in the U.S. are based on where you live for the most part. Where you live has been determined historically by redlining, and what it means is that our schools are segregated. What it also means is that we have less and less students who are going to schools where they have friends that look different than them. So if all of your friends look the same as you and are relatively in the same income level as you, because that's how your housing district is or your school district is, then that becomes your normal. So I was really lucky when I was younger to go to a school that was extremely, extremely diverse. And Joey's nodding because we shared a little moment of being in the same county growing up. But I went to a school that was really, really diverse until 5th grade. And then I went to a predominantly white school. And it was a traumatic move for lots of reasons. But I think mostly because of school. I didn't see people who looked like the school that I left. And that was really hard for me. But as I got older, I sought out a diverse group of friends. And so there was a recent study by Pew, I think, that said that 75% of white Americans only have white friends. And if you think about where your friends come from an early age, it's usually school. So we can't talk about changing school until we talk about changing where people live. We can't talk about where people live until we can talk about who gets banked and who doesn't. And we can't talk about that until we talk about redlining. So it's not an easy solution. But there, you can certainly trace why some of this is the case. So that's it on education. I'm sure I will jump in when it comes to workplaces, because I think this is where the workplace has a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I'll go from the workplace standpoint. I'll just say at the start, systemic change should feel like a sacrifice. And it needs to feel like a sacrifice because there needs to be a significant overcorrection or realignment from the current way that things operate, because the systems in and of themselves, we can talk education, we can talk government, we can talk all manner of systems that function within the US and even abroad. They're not, well, I'll say it this way, they're designed for certain people to win and have privilege. And we need to see a day where the table is level, the playing field is level. And that's going to require such an overcorrection where it feels like a sacrifice. And it should. There was a stat that came out with regard to the Paycheck Protection Program, where 83% of dollars, well, I should clarify, 83% of loans went to businesses owned by whites. Only 2% of loans went to businesses owned by blacks. And if you were to say from a dollar to dollar perspective, that's probably not even 2% of the money, because for every barbershop, every small business, you know, there's the Shake Shacks of the world who got billions and millions and millions of dollars rather. So the funding is not equal. And Sarabi, you talked about banking and non-banking. I feel that in order for systemic change to happen within the business community, there needs to be greater access to funding and capital in the same way that a white person can walk into a bank and get a loan. You need to be able to match person to person, background to background, profile to profile, and blacks and other minorities be able to qualify for similar kind of funding as well. That's just not the case. There are plenty of stories of African Americans walking into banks, having 700 credit scores, having more houses, having positive net income and net worth, and being unable to qualify for loans. But then you have Robbie coming out of college and getting not only loads of credit card loads of credit cards, but also loans to go and start a business and things of that nature. And so we have to look at the way we finance our communities and the way that we educate our communities as well.
Wow. You two said a mouthful. Man, Joey, like I loved how you touched on the systemic racism within the financial industry. And Sarabi, I loved how you tied in education to where we live. I think that when it comes to, so I'm an advocate for telling stories, and I think that when it comes to the workplace or just any sort of like public, I guess public groups that include everybody, I think that when everyone has a chance to tell their story, to tell their experience, that's when they will be heard. And when they are heard, they will start to become empowered or feel like that they are empowered. And when people feel like that they are empowered, people will then be invested. I think that the current narrative of not only history but in entertainment is it's very white. It's very it's matter of fact, it's not only white, but it's more like upper class or just like middle class, white. I mean, just that. And I think that because not everyone's narrative is told, that leads a lot of people to believe that their life doesn't matter, that their experience doesn't matter. And so I think that we need to not only encourage people to tell their story, but actually help them to get a platform. One of the things that I do as a writer is it's very important for me to encourage people to tell their story, because a friend of mine had told me, it's like, if you don't tell your story, you don't exist, right? And when you don't exist, it's there may not be change brought from what you're saying. So yeah, I advocate not only giving everyone a seat at the table, but giving everyone a chance to serve themselves.
I absolutely agree with what you just said, Laurent. I know I say that a lot, but I really resonate. I feel like especially in the I feel like especially in the workplace, right? Like a lot of the time we see all this, like how systemic racism and systemic oppression actually plays out, like in organizations, right? If you look at the data, the diversity data, and not just about like, entry-level staff. We can look at different job levels at different departments. There's always, only like 1 to 2% Black people, or like 2 to 3% Latinx. That's a problem. I feel like, especially in the tech world. I mean, a lot of the time, like people kind of use the excuse like, oh, we can't find talents, like, oh, we have this problem, we have these issues, oh, there's a pipeline problem. Like I said before to someone, no, it's not the pipeline problem. The pipeline itself is how you design the pipeline is the problem. The pipeline itself is not a problem, right? If you like make like if you have all the specifications that only allow certain group of people to pass through the pipeline, of course you have no talents, right? And the other thing I always say to people is that when we talk about diversifying a workplace or organization, it's not just about talking about how we can hire more people of color or hire more people from the marginalized or underrepresented communities. It's about how we can make them stay, how we can like make them feel belong, how we can make them feel that they have opportunities to advance their career, right, or to make a contribution to the organization. So a lot of the time I always encourage people, well, you kind of have to start from like promoting or hiring more people of color to the managerial or the leadership level, because people need someone to look up to. For example, I'm a gay Asian, okay? People call me Gaysian. So when I go to an organization, if I see, the manager level or the leadership level, they're all white cisgender, I would just be like, okay, I just kind of get a sense that no matter how hard I try, I can never ever get to that level because I'm not one of those people, right? So I feel like even though people say representation matter, yes, it is. It really matters. But but it also like we have to think about it from like different levels, and like, you know, how we can actually make people feel belong, and how we can provide an equitable and inclusive environment for people to strive, to thrive.
So I think that the workplace is where we have, to me, the greatest opportunity, which is that people can choose to hire, that you can choose to have a diverse team, because what we know about diverse teams are that they make better decisions, they can tackle better problems, they can tackle harder problems, and they generally work well together after they get through some of their work, right? So that there's a very human case, and integrity and moral case, but there is also this case that time and time again, teams who bring diverse perspectives are able to tackle harder problems better together. So to me, that is the absolute opportunity that workplaces have to not only think about getting smart people in the door, getting people in the door to bring different perspectives, getting people to work on complicated problems together, and because they have to work as a team, for us to start building bridges in the workplace. If our schools aren't doing it and our colleges didn't do it, our workplaces have an opportunity to do it. And frankly, our workplaces also, not only do they have an opportunity to do that, when you have employees who need to deliver on whatever it is you're building, a product or a service, then you also have the capacity to hold people accountable. And so you can choose as somebody in a workplace to say, what I want to build is a space where we can talk about this, that we want to have an equitable space because it is good for our team, it's good for our deliverables, and more importantly, it's the right thing to do. So to me, this is the huge opportunity open for workplaces that I don't know how many people are really taking it, but it means building a different pipeline, one that doesn't have holes in it to fix your retention problem, and it needs to come from the top.
Yeah, well said. And I think there may be someone here listening or viewing this and say, or assume that workplace, when we say workplace, we mean the white collar corporate 9 to 5 environment. That couldn't be further from the truth, because when we think about the killing of George Floyd, those officers were at work. When we think about the fact that I know we wanted to touch about on hospitals and healthcare, when we think about the pain that's inflicted on and the mortality rates of African American women in the birthing process, those doctors and nurses and midwives are at work. And so whatever sphere you work in, there is work to be done on diversity, equity, inclusion, and having greater understanding of the challenges that are faced. And quick plug for investigative journalism, listen to a good podcast or watch a documentary or something that will help you learn these issues. And then really quickly, I think I have like 45 seconds. Author brought up employee retention. And what companies don't realize, whether it's Silicon Valley, Midwest America, whatever, if you're trying to recruit persons of color into your workplace, it's not just about your workplace. You need to be thoughtful about what does the environment and the community look like and feel like. If I'm going to work in Menlo Park, where's my barber? Where's my church? Where's my place to gather and happy hour? Where's my friend group going to be? If you want to be thoughtful about diversity, equity, inclusion in the hiring and the retention of your employees, don't think just about 9 to 5. Think about how you can help make your communities more diverse to attract people to get them to stay.
Those were phenomenal points, man. Like the thing. So for me, just to make this quickly, the thing about employee retention is it's all about having employees feel like that they belong, feel like that they contribute, and feel like that they're welcome. Joey, you mentioned Menlo Park, and so as someone in tech, as someone who writes about race in tech, Google has 2% black folks, right? Facebook has 3%. Twitter, about out of 4 like 4,500 employees, 80 of them are Black. So what that tells me is that is an unfriendly atmosphere for me. Look, there's a reason why these companies have so little Black folks. And I don't mean POC, because a lot of companies hide behind that. But when you don't have that many Black folks, when you don't have that many Latinx folks, that's called failure. And that's a systemic failure. So Sarabi had talked about creating a pipeline so that there are no holes. There's people outside of Stanford, Berkeley, and MIT. There's colleges in the Midwest. There's HBCU colleges. And when these employees come to HR, come to leadership, and state that they've been harassed, state that the workplace is not welcoming, you need to listen. Because again, when I see those numbers, I say, that's not for me. So change starts from the top, and it starts through a welcome pipeline.
Thank you for sharing. Joey, something that you mentioned really resonates and hits home with me, because a lot of people think that a human exists in a very singular plane, right? And you mentioned like how we exist is just not from 9 to 5. How we show up is the same person as we are at home, in whichever communities that we belong to, and at work. It's not like Mila becomes Mila 9.0 and work, and a Mila 2.0 at home. No, Mila is still Mila. And that is something that we need to understand. When we say we, I'm saying collectively, organizations need to understand business is personal, because you have humans in your organization. When I say business, it's just not the 9 to 5 job, not just Google, right? Like police departments, hospitals, schools, whichever place that you go to work, because you're spending 70 to 80% of your awake time at work trying to find a living, trying to pay for your rent, trying to buy food, right? Trying to sustain yourself. How can you sustain yourself when your well-being is impacted at a very granular level? And, you mentioned something, Arthur, you mentioned something about, talent, not being able to find talent. That's bias in how they have designed. And I was speaking with one of the recruiters a few days ago. The way that job descriptions are being created is a very privilege. You need to have a master's degree. You need to have 15 years of experience. Where is the bloody 15 years of experience coming from when diversity jobs are just sprouting out? When diversity effort was a back burner, when it was a narrative being pushed into the future of work. What future work? What spaceships are we waiting for when it needs to happen in the bloody right now? Right? That you bring out a really great point. And Silicon Valley. This is one thing that I have with Silicon Valley. Yes, everyone wants to get on the bandwagon. Let's advocate. To Joey's point at the beginning of the show, you mentioned, are we allies or all eyes, right? And I feel that there's so many people, the tech companies, the bro tech companies, like we are advocates of diversity when women are treated unfairly. When pay equity is not even present for women or women of color or people of color. So we really need to dive deep into all of the systemic issues that we exist, right? And I want to transition into the last question. I know that we are running out of time, but I love all of your points of view and the actions that you're taking, your advocacy. How do we ensure that the actions that we are taking do not get overshadowed by policies within organizations or policies put in place by governments? To Joe's point, right, like those loans were more available for white-owned businesses. So how do we ensure that actions do not become overshadowed by policies? I want to hear your thoughts.
I'll go first. There's a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And what he says in the book is that we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And so we have to create systems that support our greatest ambitions, because we may get tired, we may want a day off, we may leave an organization, but what are we leaving behind? We need to create systems that not only last beyond our time in an organization, but allow others to participate in the goals that we have as well. So my big takeaway in any conversation that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion is look at your systems, tweak them, fix them, blow them up, and build them back together again. Because if you're just goal oriented, you're gonna shoot for the moon, aim for the stars, and think that the stars is okay when really we need to be on the moon. So fix your systems, and I think that's how you will have lasting change.
I totally love that, Joey, man. I echo that. I mean, like, you look, the systems that most companies have in place are not just. They're not built to benefit folks who look like myself, folks who look like Mila, Arthur, Sarabi, Joey. It's just not going to happen. So what people need there's a couple things. You can either go the entrepreneurial route, which I mean, some people do, but that's not for everybody. Or you can be an ethical troublemaker, and just start and just go about your way of affecting change. Understand this, that it's not going to happen in one generation. But what I love what Joey said is that it's also not about you. It's about what you leave behind. Because see, here's the deal. I'm 41 years old, right? And I want to make sure that the LaRon Barton coming after me has an easier time. It's all about paying it forward, and it's all about helping those that are coming behind me. So there may be times that I may have to take some blows, that I will be ridiculed, that I will be called everything in the book. But if I'm not challenging the status quo, I'm not doing my job.
Anyone else?
So I have changing systems. So if you are able to, you should vote, not just in presidential elections, but in your local elections, because your local policies have huge implications for the city you live in. And not only, kind of as LaRon was saying, not only what's happening today, but what's happening 20 years down the road. So I would say, if you are able to vote, vote and vote in all the elections, in every single one. Know who your candidates are up and down the ballot. Fill out the census, which is another way that money gets distributed and we know who's here. So I think those are the things that we can do. That is 1 day, 2 days a year to change systems that are going to have long-term policy impacts. And then the other thing that we can do to change system is bend the ear of people who are in our circle. So if you have influence over somebody who happens to be a friend of yours, you don't even have to work in the same place, and maybe it's better that you don't work in the same place, and they have power, bend their ear, have them change their systems within their organizations. I think all of those are important. And then the last one, how do we change systems? We vote with our dollar. So where are you spending your money? Who are you spending your money to? How often are you purchasing, and from where? Yes, Amazon is really easy to purchase from. Do they align with your values or not? Are there other ways you can get your books? So, vote for your candidates, vote with your dollar, and bend the ears of your friends. Those are my ways to make system change.
Basically, I don't have anything in particular to add because Surabhi, you totally nailed it. But one thing about in terms of in within organizations, I feel like what we can do is that people like myself, like Asian folks, I always call Asian folks, we have to stop being complicit into, the white adjacent privileges. Because a lot of the time, like we all know, especially in the tech companies, right? A lot of the time it's like white folks and then it's Asian folks. They make up like 80 to 90% of the workforce. And so that means that, so for Asian folks, we also have to be aware how we actually, complicit in terms of perpetuating anti-Blackness. Or like how we actually play a role, like, in perpetuating the systemic racism. But at the same time, how we can actually utilize this so-called unquote privileges to kind of create a more equitable environment for everyone. I feel like a lot of the time people feel like, oh, if I advocate for like, equality or equity, that means I get less of the pie. But you're like, no, that's not how it works. Because it's like, as Asians, that's the analogy I always use. As Asians, we can be, kind of some sort of invisible, but when something hit us, like COVID-19, all of a sudden, we are no longer the model minority. We are just like the Kung Flu, right? The Kung Flu, Chinese flu, whatever you call it. So basically, for like everyone already mentioned, it's for the long run, right? For the next generations ahead, right? If we pave the path right now, then, everyone will benefit eventually. So I feel like there's nothing of saying like, oh, it doesn't really matter. I can't really make a contribution. It's just me. But everything starts from us, right? And from us, it means like as individuals and as a community.
Beautiful, very beautiful thoughts and insights from all of you. And I know we are at the last minute, not last minute, but never mind, of the show, but all of you make really great points, right? It is so important to change our narratives. To Laurent's point, we have to tell our stories, right? Our stories have got impact. I don't know if you are familiar with Chimamanda. She is a writer and a speaker and a poet. And she spoke on TEDx a few years ago. And she shared the story of the danger of a singular story, right? And that has become the new normal, the dominant culture, the dominant voice. When I say dominant culture, dominant voice, it means what are we viewing on the telly? Right? All the programs. I miss watching my British shows. Every time I turn on the telly, it's an American show where I don't get the humor. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the same thing that I'm watching over and over again. It's like making my brain melt. I mean, no offense to American television, but I miss watching my British shows. So we have to expose ourselves to diverse literature, right? Like put Brené Brown aside. Read Chimamanda, read different authors, right? Who are saying the same messages, but they are not getting the algorithm push or the PR push as they should be getting, as other privileged writers are getting. So we need to tap into our own minds and challenge ourselves. It's like, what am I doing? How am I learning these narratives? And really tap into those to make a really systemic change within ourselves as well. So before we wrap up, I want to share just one action item from each of you that you are doing right now in your communities to bring about equity.
Joey?
I hear so much of voices. Don't be shy.
So I'll go. I'm a parent, and I think about how I parent and how we talk about what's going on in the world every day, whether it is good, bad, or ugly. And so that is a very daily practice of doing something all the time. So it does mean talking about race. It does mean talking about policing. It does mean all of the complicated things and doing it in an age-appropriate way. So I would encourage other parents, especially parents with young children. They get it. The kids know. They can talk about it. It's the adults that have a harder time. But that's an action that I take every day, and hoping that it is not only going to pay dividends to me, but also after I'm not here?
I also am a parent. I have a 19-month-old, and we don't have conversations of race at this point. It's more about her favorite Netflix shows and things like that. But what I can do for my daughter is really just to speak into her and build her up so that she has a very high sense of self, very high self-esteem. Because when she goes into the world will challenge that. And so I want her to have firm footing to stand on. My wife and I do really well with that. As far as the spaces that I move at work, it's really about being that bold advocate for equality. You know, it's not enough to stand on the sidelines and maybe let things pass or find that diplomatic way to say things later down the road. We really have to address the urgency of now with regard to racial issues. And so whether that means using my voice on boards to inspire change, using my voice with customers to inspire change, within our own organization, making sure that my team is diverse, doing all those things to help make this world a better place. And none of us can do that alone.
For me, it's I still write about race from the viewpoint of the Black man in America. I do it in a very unapologetic way. The reason why that I do that is because I want people to truly see our experience and to really understand that this is the America that we inhabit. You know, these are the situations that we have to go through. I think that when it comes to racism and race, we should not soften it at all. I also encourage other people, other Black, Latinx, Asian people of Middle Eastern descent, indigenous folks to write about their experiences, and I help them in any way I can. As I said before, I feel that the dominant narrative swallows everything, and that everyone needs a chance to be heard. So that's what I'm doing right now.
So for me, what I'm doing in my organization is that I kind of take up kind of like a cultural ambassador role, like in a way that like I, send out like e-blast newsletter. They're talking about like race, ethnicity, some kind of uncomfortable conversations, just to at least to have people be more aware of the situation right now. Because I feel like especially in San Francisco or the Bay Area, people kind of live in a bubble. That's my impression. Everything's fine, everything seems to be okay, but that's not the case. So, and I feel like people sometimes they just need a reality check, and they just kind of need to know what exactly is going on, in the United States. So the other thing I do aside from work is I kind of use the LinkedIn, like social media platform, just to kind of educate people, about issues around like race, racial inequity, like in the workplace or in our society in general. Surprisingly, people, they do read them. And every so often, I get like people messaging me saying like, oh, thank you, I didn't know about that. Oh, thank you. Like, it's great. Of course, there are tons of haters as well, right? Like, calling me all these sort of things. But sometimes like don't estimate yourself, like don't estimate your voice, don't estimate your experience. I feel like all of us can make a big difference. Sometimes people might not tell us, but just to acknowledge that, whenever we do something, as long as we're doing it from our heart and we believe that what we're doing is right, people can feel it and people listen and people will follow. Just like empathy, right? I feel like empathy can be contagious. It's like, social modeling. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And it's so true. Empathy, right? Empathy is such an imperative factor of whom we are. And it's not something that you take a class overnight and you become empathetic. It's not a mask that you put on and put off. It's not a switch that you turn on and turn off. It is a continuous effort. It's a continuous, genuine, heart effort that we have to take, right? And we each have a voice, and our voice is such an important part of the narratives that we are building in this community. Diversity isn't only written in black and white. Diversity isn't a new concept that we are facing right now. It has been a concept that has been made invisible. Diversity isn't an isolated team. It does not belong in the bloody basement beside a broken water tank. Diversity from a larger lens is about every one of us and how we are able to accept each other, starting at homes and at the playground. We need to have hardship with empathy, which is the now of leadership and us. Leadership is just not for dominant cultures or dominant narratives. It is for all of us. Earth is a diverse ecosystem, and humans make that ecosystem. All of us have a beating heart. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, all the partners. Thank you, Surabhi. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Leron. Thank you, Arthur, for being here on dismantling discrimination and enabling diversity through the 4 ships. And viewers, listeners, please give this a thumbs up, subscribe, and you can listen to this again on iTunes. Hardship, the now of leadership in us. Thank you, everyone. Do not go anywhere. And folks out there, I'll be back next week on machismo. How do we dismantle machismo and enable diversity through 4 ships? So see you again next week.